Namaste. Welcome to the another edition of the Uncrossing. Today we'll be discussing the role of church in academia, and we have a wonderful panel. I would introduce each and every one of them. Our first panelist is Tilotima. She is a mechanical engineer with 2 degrees from the same university in Germany as Karl Benz. She also grew up surrounded by teachers and thinkers, as both her parents were also academics. Our second panelist is Sri Robert Rosario, who is a consumer, social, and political activist and has, when necessary, spoken against the church for its hypocrisy. Mr. Rosario is a strong believer and proponent of promoting native languages and culture and a campaigner against English medium. Lastly, our third panelist is Dhanesh Maharajji. He is from the West Indies and he's a cultural activist over there. And he attended the University of West Indies Institute of Commercial Management, School of Practical Accounting, and has a master's in management studies. And he's also a playwright. And he will be presenting a presentation in a short while. Now, my first question is to Tilottamaji. Tilottamaji, you are from an engineering background. What I would like to know is about your thoughts on the STEM subjects that has been influenced by missionaries who are backed by the church.
Thanks. Okay, so what I'm going to say is I think it's valid for STEM in general, but I would emphasize a little more on what I know, which is engineering. And before I start, I think I need to I will try to be brief, but it might end up being a little long. Talk about what engineering is, and the reason I'm doing this is because people often tend to confuse engineering with programming or building websites and apps, which is a version of engineering. But engineering actually used to be, earlier it used to be known as applied science or applied mathematics, and basically what it is it's about understanding one or more branches of science and then using that understanding to create things and to make them work. Okay, so to create things and make things work, one, in addition to understanding the science and the maths, one also needs to have a very clear understanding of limitations and boundaries. I'll give you an example. Like cars, you have what's known as ABS, which kind of controls how you brake, right? So modern cars typically have ABS. Now ABS is based on what is known as it kind of, to calculate it uses friction, and it looks at the tire slipping. So it kind of tries to control how the tire slips when you brake. But friction curves that are used to calculate this, they're actually just curves, and those coefficients of the point about friction is that there is a coefficient of friction, if you remember school physics, and this coefficient of friction is also dependent on the tire slipping. So as the tire slip changes, that value, the coefficient changes, and there is no formula for this, right? The reason I'm bringing this up is because there's no formula. It has to be figured out experimentally, and when you figure something out experimentally, there are boundaries, within which, so you've tested it between boundary A and B, and that's the boundary within which it needs to work. Why am I mentioning this? This understanding of limitations of the science or the math or of the system, that is very, very difficult to teach via books. I mean, it's pretty much impossible to teach with books. It needs to be hands-on. Okay, so engineering is very hands-on. The knowledge that's passed has to be a continuous, you need to pass it on continuously. It needs to go from teacher to student. In fact, it needs to go from a teacher to many students, because engineers tend to, take a lot of risks and blow themselves up some way or the other. So it's a good idea to have many people who know how something works. So why am I even bringing this up? Because usually when we talk about, what missionaries did, or what the influence of colonialism was on any civilization. I mean, this talk today is, it's not specific to India or anything. This is for any other civilization. usually we talk about the history, we kind of understand how that was changed. Maybe we talk a little bit of science, and then there are all these claims about, was this there, was that there, was this real, was it not real? But very, very often we don't really talk about engineering. Now, science, this is a very, very simplified way of, explanation that I'm giving, but science, within quotes, you can get away with, for example, having a discovery, putting it down in a paper or a book, and then somebody discovering it 80 years later, and then kind of picking up from where you left off. For example, there was Mendel, who is the father of genetics, and he came up with this amazing set of experiments and discoveries. He published it, and then everyone forgot about it. Nobody really knew about it for I think, well, my science textbook, I think, said 80 years, but current thing says about 30 years, but whatever it is, several generations. So the point, several generations of scientists. So the point is that you can still get away with that, doing that in science. But if a nation knows how to build a submarine or an aircraft carrier, that teaching needs to be continuous. You need to have a next set of engineers and a next set of engineers that are taught how to build a submarine or an aircraft carrier. Just a little aside here, I am when I say submarine or aircraft carrier, I'm not implying that in ancient India we had submarines or aircraft carriers. These are just examples, okay? So anyway, so my point is, and the reason I said a nation builds a submarine or an aircraft carrier is because there is a very, very small limit to what one person can come up with on their own, typically on a very small budget, okay, in engineering. So like if you imagine a village blacksmith, they would be able to maybe come up with some cute mechanical toy, or maybe they could even come up with a horse carriage. But one blacksmith cannot build an aeroplane or a spaceship or even a modern car. So engineering needs a lot of collaboration, and that in turn needs funding and benefactors who are willing to take risks. Okay, so but the main thing about why I'm even talking about engineering today is because engineers build, okay, and civilizations are built. They have technology, and that technology is usually very complicated technology, as we have seen, we know, and I mean, all over the world, you can see this complications. Sorry, there's some disturbance. Is that just me?
I don't think so.
Okay, you're not hearing a disturbance. All right. So yeah. So basically, the point is that it's complicated technology. So therefore, every civilization must have had a system for teaching engineering, right? Like I was saying, it's a system where you need to continuously teach. So they must have had it, and just like every civilization must have had a system of medicine, and it must have had a system for justice and law enforcement, because these are like the fundamental building blocks of any civilization. So if you want to get to any kind of advanced level, you need to have very clear way of teaching your students or the next generation how various things work. Okay, so now we come to the missionaries. So now many people have written about what happened when missionaries came into any civilization. In India, there are really great people like Dharampalji, Munshiji, even Gandhiji, who have written about what happened when missionaries came into a place and how they killed indigenous learning systems, usually just by cutting off funding. I mean, most of the time, right? Now, in terms of quote, I'm going to quote a little bit from one authority, which is the Encyclopedia Britannica. And they are talking about, this is now Africa, and what the missionaries did there. So I'm just going to read out a few sentences. So the Society for the Propagation of Gospel in Foreign Parts. This is a Church of England organization. The Moravian Mission, the Mission of Bremen, the Methodists, and the Roman Catholic missionaries all established them on the Gold Coast, which is now Ghana, between 1820 and 1881. opening elementary schools for boys and girls, a seminary, and eventually a secondary school in 1909. So, and there are similar things for every other country, but I just picked one country at random. So basically, Gold Coast, they started establishing primary schools in 1820, and they established the first secondary school in 1909. In 1914, when they did a survey, they found that in Gold Coast, the government was responsible for only 8% of the schools. In Nigeria, this number was even less. Anyway, generally, the British people preferred to leave education to missions, which were given variable financial aid, usually from local and inadequate sources. But the main point is that even though these missions were given inadequate financial aid, whatever existing education system was there, it was given zero financial aid. I mean, in fact, whatever way it had of getting financial aid was completely removed. So, usually we know how it went with, witch hunts and all that. I'm not going to get into all that. But the point is, whatever was there was destroyed. And in its place, there was a system which for nearly 100 years, 90 and odd years, did not even have a secondary school in an entire country. Okay, and then special importance was placed on religious and moral instruction. So basically, missionaries came in, destroyed whatever was there, and then didn't put anything else in its place, right? There was an additional problem. Now, if you think of who these missionaries were, because now I'm again going back to missionaries and STEM subjects, most of them were bordering on illiterate themselves. Okay, at best maybe they went to some college of theology and did something with regard to some religious stuff. But in terms of teaching children, in what way were they qualified to teach them anything at all, right? So I'm sure. I mean, I do know that many of the monasteries in Europe, etc., had scientists and mathematicians, etc., there. But if you think about it, a physicist or a chemist or a mathematician would stay home in the monastery, right? So the ones who would actually come out into these foreign missions, if they did, the few who did, would be usually botanists or zoologists. And between their expeditions, I mean, because you can't sit in a one village or one town if you're doing botany or zoology. You have to go on an expedition. You have to wander around the place. So between that, maybe they taught in some schools or colleges. But basically, and I have several papers that I dug up for this, but basically, most teaching in schools was limited to spelling, grammar, moral studies, within quotes, geography. This geography included, the Mercator presentation, the projection, which meant that Germany looks the same size as India, and that is so deeply ingrained even today that when I was in college, I was having an argument with a junior of mine who was from India, but came from a missionary background, and we were having an argument about what the size of India is compared to the size of Germany. And even when I showed him the actual land area, in terms of numbers, he refused to believe me. He's like, no, you can see it on the map. They are about the same size. So that's the version of geography that was taught. And of course, we all know how history was taught. I mean, I won't even go into that right now. So basically spelling, grammar, moral studies, which is religious propaganda, geography, which is, economic propaganda, and history, which was cultural propaganda. So that was what was taught in the schools. And this is why even today, we often confuse education with being able to speak grammatically correct English with a posh accent. That's about what we consider educated. And that's really where this idea comes from. So a little more on what was taught in mission schools. This is another article I found. This is on colonial America. So formal education in colonial America was primarily limited to teaching literacy and training the elite college bound in the classics. Classics being, I think, some Latin and Greek something. So one common form of schooling in Northeast and Middle colonies was the town school. An English institution for training clerks. Thus, the curriculum originally included arithmetic until Puritan influence replaced this non-academic skill subject with religion and a greater emphasis on reading. So in cities with business interests, certain mechanical mathematics skills were still needed and taught in a few schools. Later in the 18th century, Ben Franklin's crusade for utilitarian education and the rise of academics saw arithmetic and mechanical arts introduced as subjects for their intrinsic value in the real world. So basically what missionaries did was they went to a series of different civilizations, all of who had very advanced levels of engineering, medicine, law, what have you, and they just killed it. They just completely killed it by just, and didn't put anything else in its place. So what else died in the process, right? So not only was the hands-on knowledge lost, that, as I said, if you break that teaching chain, it's gone. Engineering text and documentation was lost as well. Now, why was this lost? For example, even today, right? Most Sanskrit texts are translated by experts in Sanskrit. But technical texts should actually be translated by engineers, or based on what technical stuff is. They should be translated by engineers who know Sanskrit, or in collaboration with a Sanskrit scholar. I'm just giving this as an example, but this is true for any other civilization, any other language, right? Because, for example, if I have a text which says stress is proportional to strain, right? Now, as an engineer or as a physicist, I would look at it and say, okay, this is stress and strain in the technical terms. But if I was somebody who had only learned moral studies, spelling, and grammar, I would most probably translate this as the more stress you have, the more pain you feel, and therefore you should, I don't know, turn to God or one of those things, because I don't even know what this is talking about. I have no background information on which to base this on. So and this becomes really important because over time, earlier we had those leaves on which we used to write and so on, and other civilizations had other things, even books which were handwritten. But eventually, with the printing of books, as the printing press came in, that was completely controlled by colonial missionaries, right? And therefore they decided what gets printed and they decided what gets kept. And in the process, so many of the things that they didn't understand, they were just thrown away, right? Because it's a human thing to do, because printing was really expensive. You just throw away what you don't understand, right? So there's a lot of stuff just got destroyed. And then there was the whole plagiarism, which can I take another couple of minutes, or have I been talking for too long already?
If you can finish off in another 1 minute, I would be grateful.
Okay, so I will, yeah. So I'm just going to briefly talk about plagiarism. This is a very touchy subject. It's really hard to say, you're accused of being nationalist or whatever else if you say that, this came from us. So I'm not going to talk about STEM. Instead, I'm going to, there is a paper that I found. I will tell you who the author is. This is, I think it was printed in a fairly prestigious journal, published in a fairly prestigious journal. It talks about mission schools in India and religious studies. And basically what they did, so mission schools in India, I didn't know this, and I might be getting into the territory of one of the other speakers, but basically they were very worried about, the parents when they sent their children were very worried that they would be converted. So apparently, if even one kid in the school converted, then all the parents would stop sending the kid to that mission school. So what missionaries used to do is that they would say, no. In fact, they would have people standing outside the school advertising for the school, saying that in this school, not a single pupil has got converted in the last 30 years. Don't worry about it. This is not there. We don't convert people in the school. Please send your kids to the school. So once the kids come to the school, they would have moral studies and religious studies where you compare different religions and basically say, okay, what is your religion? What is the stuff? And then look, this is so similar in Christianity. And then apart from that, outside school, they would also have discussions with scholars from other religions, and they would find similarities between the religions. But then about 10 or 20 years down the line, this was in 1800 late 1800s. So around early 1900s, these same schools had started going around saying, look, Krishna is a loving God who preaches universal love. Obviously, this was copied from Jesus Christ. So, and all the comparisons that they found, they turned it on its head and they said, you know what? These things come from Christianity. These were earlier missionaries who came to you 1,000 years ago, who taught you this, and then now you pick this up and you put this into your religion, and now you are claiming it's from your religion. So if this is the state of religion, you can imagine what they did to science and technology that they picked up from other civilizations. I'll stop for now here and let
Thank
some
you.
others go on. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Philomena. Brilliantly articulated of your continuation of science into academia, missionary academia. Sir Robert Rosario, sir, my next question to you is this. You have mentioned that you are against English medium and you believe in promoting native languages. The academia in India, some of the best schools are controlled by the church, and there are some very fine Christian education institutes across India. There is no doubt, and they have produced some brilliant people. I'm from Delhi. St. Stephen College has produced some of the present foreign minister is from St. Stephen's, and many army officers have come from, military officers have come from St. Stephen's. However, you are against English medium, but it has been claimed that wherever missionaries are active, the people in that particular area are found to be educationally developed. Sir, your thoughts? You have to unmute yourself, Mr. Osorio. You have to unmute yourself, sir.
Namaste. When you say educationally improved, what sort of education is it? Your critical thinking is gone, only literacy is increased. Is it education? When you don't have the freedom to think freely, but only a very concise way you are educated, do you call it educated? I will give you one example, because talking with examples will be of more meaningful. I am fighting the misdeeds of the church in a big way. Particularly in the city of Mangaluru, I belong to Mangaluru. What the church is doing to its own people, forget outsiders, forget Hindus, for our own Christians, how they are disturbing, how they are into land grabbing. The famous St. Aloysius College of Mangaluru, which is run by again Jesuit Society, you mentioned about big colleges in Delhi, St. Stephen's, St. Xavier's, it is managed by Jesuits. Same Jesuits are running St. Aloysius College in Mangaluru. They are also into the business of land grabbing in a big way. There was one a Christian family touching the compound of Aloysius College, who was residing for years. They wanted to grab the land, so in the year 2016, broad daylight at 2 o'clock in the noon, they tied down the owner of his daughters had gone out for work. They tied down the person and demolished the house using a JCB, earth mover machines in broad daylight. And media as such will make it as if it's a land dispute, it's nothing big, something like that. They report it, they can't go without reporting, but they made a land dispute, something like that, instead of getting a very big crime. So my association tried to contact some people, to create some public opinion. Now, obviously, Christians, you may say they are, being brainwashed during Sunday masses, but we contacted some the so-called eminent people of Mangaluru, including lawyers and big professionals who have studied in St. Aloysius. Obviously, professionals mean they have studied in St. Aloysius College. But their reaction was very, no, you are fighting against St. Aloysius. We can't give any opinion. We can't, because we have studied there. I am an alumni of that. So now you tell me what sort of people are being created in this, so highly educated, what you mentioned, what sort of education they impart? Quality education. So this is the quality. You produce advocates, you produce doctors, but who can't stand up for truth, who can't stand up for justice. Because I am an alumni of that college, I won't be able to speak. This kind of spineless professionals you create, this is the kind of education church is promoting, and this is exactly what the church wants. It's the very purpose of why the church is in the business, into the business of education. I would call it a business. Yes, before the Christianity came into India, education was not a business. Healthcare is not a business. Now, healthcare is a business, education is a business. And why they are in this business of education? Because you get to control the society. Your flock may be small, you may be just 2% in India. But the people who studied in your colleges, that population is large. And apart from being large, they are elite. Just now you mentioned the ministers, foreign affairs minister was elite. That elite was educated in missionary school. So obviously they have some inclination, some soft corner towards the church. This is the obvious agenda of the church, and they are promoting it in a big way. Your question is answered, or?
Yeah, I think Balaji, you're on mute.
I had muted myself. I'm sorry.
Okay. No.
Mr. Osorio, another question for you, sir. Is it fair to say that after the British left India, we not only continued to educate our children the same way, but we did nothing to develop the lost gurukulas? The British, the famous Macaulay, the thing where our own original school systems were systematically, destroyed. We never. Do you think that did we do anything to develop our lost gurukulas, or we thought that okay, we have a fine institute with us? The railways is also been attributed to the British, that the British gave us railways, but actually it was built to carry our raw material from India to UK to be manufactured in the factories of Manchester and sold back to us. So, sir, I would like to know your thoughts on that, sir.
Pardon, what was the...
So the question was that the British left India, but we continued their same education system.
Continue, same education system, but I am more worried that when the British left India in 1947, the damage was much lesser than what is today. Say I was born after 20 years of British leaving India. Then why I was made to study English? And when I went to school, it was Kannada medium here in primary. There was no English medium around. Now, you don't find Kannada medium around here. I am in a village, I am not in a city. I am not in Mangalore city, I am much away from the city. In a rural area I am talking about. There are only English medium students now, come up now in the last 10-20 years. So damage is more now. When the British were living or about to live or just before living, the damage was much lesser. It is percolated down more. The damage is more now. And you talked about going back to the Gurukulas. Forget about going back. We are not able to stop the damage. The damage is continuing in a big way after 70 years. And the English, the attraction for English, I don't know why that madness for English. We become all superhumans the moment we learn English or become... No, actually my study says that because of English we have lost everything. We have lost our intellect, we lost our talents, we lost everything. Even economically, financially we lost very badly. There is a book by Sankaran Sanu. He has given facts and figures how English has damaged India in a bad way. Culture, not only culturally, even economically. So this education system, and you said British left India. I want to add one here. It may be sounding political, but I want to make a point here. Did the British really leave India? I mean the East India Company. When we say British, we refer to East India Company. East India Company came here in the form of Vyapari, businessman. Did they really leave? No, I don't think so. Now we are celebrating the 75th year of independence. I am worried the East India Company has not left, it has mutated. It has mutated from a business entity into a church. That time they were in the garb of a businessman, now they are garb of a religion, a church. And see the funny thing or the most atrocious thing is our constitution gives freedom of religion. Propagate and promote religion. Our constitution, majority Hindu population in this country has given constitution to itself. And the East India Company is doing in full-fledged. Empowered by the constitution. This is the irony.
I think that's some astute observation on your part, Mr. Rosario, and I want to thank you for your brilliant commentary. Now we're going to move to Dhanesh Maharajji. He's joining us from the West Indies. So you're on mute. When we say West Indies, it's a group of islands. So which particular island are you from?
Well, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. This island, I'm about to present something to you all about Trinidad and Tobago, and this island would be
Please.
possibly almost half of the population are of East Indian descent, and the indentureship trade brought our ancestors here in the year 1845 until the year 1917. Approximately 150,000 East Indians would have left India and journeyed to Trinidad and Tobago during that time. But not only Trinidad, but Guyana in the South Americas and Suriname would have significant populations of East Indians and significant populations of Hindus and Muslims as well. So yes, Trinidad and Tobago is actually my home, and we are a cosmopolitan country, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious. And I guess the East Indian influence in Trinidad and Tobago is extremely prominent.
That's a good thing to know. So, Maharajji, you were supposed to give a presentation. If you could please go ahead with that, sir.
Yeah, yes, definitely. So I'm going to share my screen now.
Yes, sir.
I'm actually not able to share.
I think the administrator should be able to share the document. Until that time, Maharajji, if you could please let us know that how some of the names, the Hindu names over the years have changed in the West Indies. It's Danish sounds more like Dinesh, and Maharaj is Maharaj, Maha. So, was there any kind of gap that people?
What happened
It's
when
an off-topic,
our
it's an off-topic
ancestors?
question, but we're just biding for the time till your presentation is shared. If you could
Yes,
share that particular information.
the names have changed over the years. Not much actually. Probably a little with the pronunciation, because when our ancestors arrived in Trinidad and Tobago, and when they had to do registration of names, remember they were illiterate. So when they went to the persons registering you at birth, they would now they wouldn't know how to spell it. So whatever they were spelling, the Western persons there, the British, they would have spelled it how they saw. And many times our ancestors, well, they came from basically the Hindi belt. They came from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar. So they spoke primarily Bhojpuri, and they spoke also Awadhi, because they refer to this island as the Ramayan country, because every night, some part of the country, Ramayana is being, the story of Ram is told all over Trinidad and Tobago. So even the story of, we call it Ram Leela here in Trinidad. It's a street play, and it's actually the largest street play in the entire Caribbean. And the entire story of well, we call it Ramcharitramanas. We actually read the Awadhi version of it, and it's still very prominent even amongst all Hindus, all Indians actually. They would go and they would look. So the story of Ram is very, very entrenched into the psyche of the. So even the building of the Ram Mandir now in Ayodhya has gained traction locally. writing about that culture of Ram here in Trinidad. So many of the names that you would see of Trinidad, you see Ram Prasad, Ram Bharat, you would see a lot of those names being the most popular names on the
Uh,
island.
I think
sorry,
Tilakama
I
has a
think
question for you. Go ahead, Tilakama.
sorry, I think the admin is asking Dhanesh ji to try sharing again.
Yeah, I
Yes,
would
I
say
think
this
I'm
is
getting
wonderful.
through now.
Not be able to share the presentation. I think it's a good thing. We learned something why the names are so different, sounding different of Hindus in in the West Indies. Thank you so much, sir. Now please go ahead and share the presentation, sir. Thank you.
Yes, I'm trying.
You said you had a question. Is it something that I can answer quickly before?
Okay, so
Okay.
I'm guessing I'm not being allowed. So I will speak from the presentation here. I don't know if you all will be able to see it.
Till the time it is available, please go ahead and you can just go through your presentation instead of showing it to us. I'm sure it will be available in a short while.
Yes. Okay. So being told to send it to Anirudh. So I don't know if you want to ask me any questions as I send the presentation to the person here now about anything about Trinidad and Tobago as the presentation will come up the presenter would send it.
Maraji, your voice is breaking up, sir.
Yeah, so I'll speak. So Trinidad and Tobago. Oh, I'm seeing it here now. So yeah, you're hearing me now, right?
Yeah, absolutely, sir.
So my topic here today is yes, to coerce and convert the East Indians in Trinidad and Tobago. And so, as I said, Trinidad is the southernmost island of the Caribbean chain of islands. We are located at the top of the of Venezuela, and Trinidad was rediscovered by Christopher Columbus in the year 1498. And from then, they brought African slaves and all of that. We had emancipation of slavery. And after that, they tried with several forms of labor, but many were not successful. And then the British, who was in control of India at that time, they realized that the climates of India, the climates of those areas, and the climates of Trinidad and Tobago were very, very similar. And the East Indians were very familiar with hard work and sugar cane and rice and all these things that we were planting right here in Trinidad and Tobago at that time. So from the year 1845 to 1917, a total of 143,939 East Indians arrived from India. And as I said, they came mainly from the northern Hindi belt states of UP and Bihar. The languages spoken were primarily Bhojpuri and Awadhi. And the religion was mainly Hinduism and Islam. And there were minor religions that minority religions that came as well. Some were Christians as well, but this was the bulk of the persons that came from India at that point in time. We were quarantined at a particular island, and basically the indentureship was no different from slavery. It was just you were getting a couple shillings for your work, but the treatment, the rape, the discrimination continued unabated. So really, it was just a paid slavery. They were promised a return trip back to India after their indentureship times. And so Reverend Morton from the Presbyterian Church of Nova Scotia, he, after visiting the estates of the East India Company, convinced the church then to do a mission here. And obviously, we know why the church was convinced to do that mission, as the one of the other presenters was speaking about how they used education to push the agenda down the throats of other persons, right? And so Reverend Morton and his wife, they left and they arrived in Trinidad and in 1871, and the first primary school was opened here. Now, we were called coolies at that point in time. Basically, we are still referred to as coolies by many persons locally. And for us, it sounds derogatory. But in fact, we've grown accustomed to it because we're probably close to the majority here. And they established this Presbyterian primary schools. Today, the Presbyterian board holds 72 primary schools and 5 secondary schools across Trinidad and Tobago. But the schools were used as a propaganda tool to ensure that the Indians were degraded, denigrated, tortured. It was used as a mental place where would be given basically church indoctrination and hope of conversion one day. And so even the writers later down in the 19th century, the very prominent Indian writers, you know, V.S. Naipaul, and he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 2001, and he, being part of that entire gang of forming a pressure group from within the Indian community to have us convert to Christianity. And so in his writings of Flag on an Island and the Middle Passage, he dismissed Hinduism as being inferior and that Hinduism was not organized. Not that we have a problem with it not being organized. And it has no fixed articles, no hierarchy. He further indicated that the material benefits of converting to Christianity. So basically, they were looking at the East Indian situation then, that we were so poor, that we were living in mud huts, that we were what we call lepaying the floor with we call it gobar locally here, and it's really cow dung we mix with dirt, and we actually paste on the floor. But that poverty wasn't as a result of religion, but poverty was as a result of our social status within the society, because we were basically slaves. We had nothing there. And so the incentives that the church would have given, and the incentives through the support of the masters at that point in time, were to actually promote these people who converted, give them and made them examples in society. So the Hindus and Muslims actually would now have the incentive to go forward and convert. And even another very prominent writer, many books out, Samuel Selvon, and also of East Indian descent, he was also speaking about, the focus on the benefits, the material benefits of converting to Christianity. And so this continued continuously, probably until the 1980s, where, East Indians were still within that bracket. And so I can go to the next slide then, all right? So, okay, thanks. And so the brainwashing and the making of examples. So the persons that attended those schools were indoctrinated into Christianity. The authors continued the narrative that their practices were primitive and had no value. Obviously, they were presenting a skewed version of what Hinduism was. And firstly, they were ridiculed for their language, which we spoke Bhojpuri and Awadhi. Very little Hindi and all of that, but mostly Bhojpuri. Even my grandparents and my parents, and even me to some extent, we can understand a bit of it still. And all our shows that we see on ZTV and all of that, we understand a bit of it because we know a bit of the language. Even our current dialect is riddled with Bhojpuri terms of Belna, Chowki, you name it. There are a lot of things that we speak that people in the Caribbean don't understand what we're saying as Trinidadians. And they were ridiculed for their language. They were belittled and made them felt inferior because of their language. And in turn, they indoctrinated, but now frown on others within the society that spoke those indigenous languages. So what happened with the language at that point in time is that our grandparents then, they would speak it within their homes, and they would not encourage their children to speak it, because when they go out into public and they would be speaking Bhojpuri, people would laugh at them basically. And in laughing at them, they didn't want that. They wanted them to learn English. So our mother tongue changed over a couple of generations. And the language, the reason why this was done is because the language was proving as a significant barrier to conversion. Especially those Indians that came and were facing the level of discrimination. They had a stronger affinity to their religion. Many of them, my grandmother would normally say that during that time, they would sit under mango trees and they would sing the Ramayana, as we call it. They would sing it, and that they would identify with Ram going into the forest as they coming to the Caribbean here, being banned basically away from their homeland. And so the educated Indians who were desirous of becoming teachers had to prove that they were members of a church or convert in order to gain employment. This is public knowledge in Trinidad. This happens even today. Sometimes they try to do it, but it's not very prevalent anymore. Many refused to convert, but poverty and the prospect of a better life forced many to convert. So many times the father in the home would have no choice but to convert, but the mother at home, the mother and the children will continue practicing their either Hinduism or Islam, as the case might be. And family members in many cases did not follow suit, but the employed member of the household had to attend church and spend time in proselytizing work. So it was a give and take, and they basically had to do it for survival. If they found out you were still practicing your indigenous faith, Islam or Hinduism, you were either transferred to remote parts of the country or fired for some fabricated reasons. And this is something that is very, very prevalent in the early part of the 19th century. The church continues to ridicule Indian indigenous practices and intimidate those that practice their faith, although Indians are now at the top of the academic ladder. While we say that the Presbyterian Church did all these things, and other churches as well, sometime around the half of the 19th century, there was an attempt by the Hindu community, the Muslim community, especially in the 1920s. In the 1920s, there was a Hindu-Muslim school established, a joint school, Hindus and Muslims coming together, and basically a shed by then Nasser Hussain. And they formed that school, and was basically to put a check on conversion. And so later down, the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha was formed in Trinidad and Tobago, and today a multitude of primary and secondary Hindu schools exist in Trinidad and Tobago, and that was to cater for the conversion that was happening, and the attempted conversion. So persons who were wanted to be employed as teachers and were Hindus and wanted to move up in the society were able to attend these schools. Secondly, the Anjuman Sunatul Association, which is by the Muslims, they formed their association, and they also opened schools. Also the Trinidad Muslim League and the Arya Pratinidhi Sabha, which are the Arya Samajas in Trinidad, and also those that followed the Kabir Pant Association, they formed schools. And so the Hindus and the Muslims started to progress. And today, if we look at Trinidad and Tobago, and as I was saying, at the top of the academic ladder, you will find persons of Indian descent. Many of them would have attended our Hindu schools, our Muslim schools, and their strategy has changed now, because no longer can they speak about material benefits of converting, since the Indians possess significant wealth in Trinidad. Right? So as my brother at the bottom there, Robert, was saying, that the entire, what they were saying in the initial which were, the reason why you are poor and you're destitute is because of your religion. Now, the Hindus, the Muslims, and the East Indians have found themselves at the top of that ladder. In fact, in St. Patrick East, where we live, is one of probably the highest or second highest performing areas in academics in the entire country. And they now dig deep into fringe practices, sometimes not even present in the local context, and present it as mainstream. So they would now create these propaganda videos and about animal and human sacrifices and all of that, and bring it in Trinidad, present it as though this is what we are doing in some closed society, or something that's not public. They buy out the media houses and spread misrepresentation of religious practices of the East Indians, and is now rampant to try to influence the current population. Hinduism, followed by Islam, continues to be the religion most adhered to by Indians, despite 150 years of constant propaganda, force, coercion, and abuse by people, by the Christian church in all its manifestations. And so, even today, from the time you exit our airport, you will see the East Indians have persevered. They have fought the conversion, and you will see mandirs. You will see, in fact, when you look at a picture of Trinidad and Tobago, some of the first things you see would be the temple in the sea, because the temple in the sea was something that we were not allowed to build a mandirs at some point, and this sadhu would move miles away with blocks and stone to fill a part of the sea to build a place to worship. And so it's nostalgic for persons of my age to think about it. But my parents, my grandparents went through a lot. But today I think we are free in that sense. But we will not forget, because those atrocities continue today. Because even today they will ask young girls to convert, if they want to become teachers. Because I mean, it's a small country. You want to become a teacher one day, maybe, and the Hindu schools don't have the amount of space. Probably government schools don't have the amount of space, and sometimes you have to go to a school. So sometimes the conversion is just a farce. They would convert, and then they would practice their thing at home, and they would just put on a show at school, I'm guessing. And so you are finding that the attempt to convert and to coerce the Hindus still exist, but in a lesser sense. But those atrocities, those things, is no less than a genocide, an attempted genocide of our people. And so this is
Uh,
Trinidad and Tobago. Yes.
Dhaneshji, I have a question because I've read these in many other stories about places like Indonesia, Pacific Islands, and so on. And since we're also talking about islands to a large extent, did you said your people, the Indians, were ridiculed if they did not convert? Was it just restricted to ridicule, or was it also things like not allowing them to trade, not allowing them access to jobs, food, water? I'm sure those things were also practiced, right?
Well, they were not allowed for jobs and all of that, basically for jobs within their religious schools. But food and all of that, I have no evidence to support that, in the sense that we had some sort of freedom in that sense, that but the East Indians of the Caribbean, of Trinidad in particular, that I know, were very, very forceful. They were very adamant about their practices, and they continue. They even today very self-sufficient, very, very united to a great extent. Sometimes we have little issues in the sense that we would want the unity to be much more, but food and water, we would normally fend for ourselves. In fact, we are the persons that feed the nation. We are the farmers, we are the engineers, the doctors, we're basically, it's not that anybody else isn't, but we have made a place for ourselves here that we can rely on ourselves, and we live together, basically. And together but we have our own space. It's multicultural, so we have our own culture, basically. And Yes, I do think it's similar to Indonesia, but it's a bit different in
Well,
that sense.
that was really a very riveting presentation given by you, Maharajji, giving us a bit of insight into the life of Indians living in the West Indies. I myself had the opportunity to meet Indians in New Zealand who are from Fiji, who had also been sent there for indenture some 130 years ago. 1875 or 1890 was the period when they had gone to Fiji. Due to time constraints, I am unable to ask a few more questions to each and every one of you. But however, hopefully we should be able to do such programs in the near future. So from team Uncrossing, I want to thank Tilottamaji, Robert Rosario, and Danish Maharaj. Thank you so much for coming and giving your views, candid views. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Dhanyavad and
Thank
Shubhrat.
you. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.